Ladies and gentlemen, this is Nate Cresswell, your host for today and forever, and welcome back to another episode of the Lawyers in the Making podcast, where it is my job to focus on the unique journeys to the law and law school of professionals in the legal field and law students. And today, we have another wonderful guest. He's a University of Illinois College of Law graduate and currently works as the owner and attorney of Patino, King, and Yost. He has held past positions as the co-founder of Lex Haven and as the attorney and owner of Patino Law Office. Finally, he is the host of the Newfangled Lawyer podcast. I'm super excited to have him on the podcast today, Mr. Patrick Patino. Welcome to the podcast. How are we doing today? Before going any further, I'd like to say a quick word about the sponsor of this podcast, Rhetoric. Back in episode 25, I had the privilege of having the CEO, Luke Yingling, on the podcast, and ever since that episode, fell in love with the product. Rhetoric takes user briefs and motions and compares them against the text of opinions written by judges to identify ways to tailor their arguments to better persuade the judges handling their cases. Rhetoric's focus on persuasion and helps users find new ways to improve their odds of success through more persuasive arguments. Know more, win more. I was able to see a demo of the product, and its cutting-edge technology and fascinating features make for a product I am proud to sponsor, and further shows the new digital era the field of law has been entering thus far on my journey doing this podcast. If you decide to book a demo, let them know Nate sent you. Be sure to check them out in the show notes below or at userhetoric.com. One word, userhetoric.com. Now, back to the show.
Oh, thanks, Nate. That was a nice intro. Um, I could add in there a couple other things like adventurer, dreamer, poet, dad, husband. Um, I really tried to focus and in the last 2 to 3 years have kind of reframed who I am. Attorney probably isn't even first anymore. It's obviously what I spend a great deal of my energy um, and time on. But I've really been fascinated by and kind of drawn to this idea of a multitude of identities. Um, and this is a big topic right now in the legal profession is like professional identity formation, and like what it means to be successful and who are you. So, you know, um, my journey of becoming an attorney, I was thinking about it before we started talking today, is not really that traditional, but I think it's pretty common. So I'm gonna start there. So a lot of people, when they're thinking about becoming an attorney are like, that's what I wanted to do. I was a poli-sci major, I was pre-law. I've People told me from an early age I argued and I'd be a good attorney. But that wasn't me at all. And actually through the conversations I've had through my own podcast is that doesn't really seem to be that common. Um, More people end up becoming attorneys almost by, I don't want to say by accident, but by someone phrased it on an upcoming episode of my podcast like there was no first option. And so becoming an attorney was like the second option kind of by default. So for me, like I graduated undergrad with a creative writing degree during the global recession in 2009. And it's like, what do you do? Like, there was no jobs. And so I was like, well, I like reading, I like writing, I like helping people. And I was like, I want to make money. Honestly, it was that simple. Um, and I took the LSAT. I didn't take a formal class. I'm telling you, like I bought like a book of those logic games, RIP, because those won't be part of the LSAT anymore. And I just went to the library and like read a book a day. And then every Saturday I would take back-to-back LSATs, practice exams. And I did that for, I don't remember, a couple months. I applied to law school, got into a handful of law schools, and then I deferred. I just wasn't ready. I had come off right after undergrad. I worked delivering furniture. Then I was a bouncer at a bar in Wrigleyville. Then I was an admission counselor at social justice university called Roosevelt in Chicago. And, you know, I just wasn't ready to go straight from undergrad, even having had a gap year. So I took some time off. I in between undergrad and law school about 2 years. And even when I went to law school, it wasn't really for the best reasons. Like I was um in a relationship with someone at the time who wanted to become an attorney, and she's like, "Well, you got into law school, like you should go to law school." So I was like, "Fine, I'll do it." Kind of thing. Not so it wasn't even like really even at that point out of like passion or because I wanted to do it. And before we started recording, we kind of talked about like why do we do things? Is it for other people? Is it for yourself? And you know, fast forward 10 years. I've been practicing now almost 10 years. Um, Bankruptcy law has been my focus area the entire time. That's what I specialized in law school. Um, now only recently, honestly, in the last 6 to 8 months, last 12 months, have I really said, I don't really care what anyone else thinks I should be doing. Um, I'm gonna do what I want to do. So that's my intro, man. That's part of me. in
No, no,
a nutshell.
it was perfectly said. You did everything you needed to say, and I enjoyed it greatly. Let's go all the way back, 2012, when you arrived at the University of Illinois College of Law. Let's talk about that first year. A lot of people love
Hmm.
it. A lot of people don't like it a lot. Some people absolutely hated it. It was the worst year of their life. How was it for you?
So I actually started um, at the John Marshall Law School, which is now University of Illinois Chicago College of Law, my 1L year. Um, and quite honestly, I didn't really think it was so horrible. I thought it was not that inspiring. It was kind of like playing a game. And if you could play the game and figure out how to shortcut the game, you'd be okay. So, I mean, that's kind of what I did is I really studied pretty hardcore Monday through Friday. I rarely did any studying on the weekend. And I went to law school with the intention of transferring, which they tell you not to do, but that's what I did. Um, and I found an awesome study group of people who actually almost everyone else in my study group ended up transferring. Um, and so that's just kind of by coincidence, honestly. So yeah, I mean, my first year of law school, the 1L year was intense. I mean, it's intense. You kind of have a single point focus. But I'm kind of an intense person. And when I focused on something, it was the first time had actually like intentionally focused on anything academically. So I don't know. I'm odd in that way. I didn't think it was so bad. And maybe it's because I'm just telling myself that. It's been a while since the beginning of the journey, but I think it can be enjoyable. I think, if you kind of put the blinders on, and don't focus on what everyone else is doing and how they're doing and how well they're doing, and don't compare yourself to other people, but at the same time, don't isolate yourself. Like you need a group of people to navigate that first year with, but it shouldn't be like, gosh, I did worse than that person or that person did better than me. Because honestly, in the grand scheme of everything, like your 1L grades don't mean diddly. Like my brother-in-law, who's an attorney, I mean, he got a C in a class and now that's what he does for a living. So, I mean, it's doesn't mean anything really in the grand scheme of things.
Absolutely. I think that's such a truism just for the pure fact that when you look backwards, I know many times in my college career, I've gotten some bad grades and I've been so pissed off and angry and like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. But in the grand scheme of it all, it really doesn't matter that much. And I think it's a lifted weight off the shoulders when you have that sort of mindset
Mm.
that as long as you're getting better on each day, and that when you reflect on the last day and you look at this day and you're doing better today, that means you made improvements. That means, you're
Yeah.
you're compounding your interest. I'm always making analogies with the gym because I love going to the gym, but it's the same thing in the gym. As long as you're lifting more, you're doing more reps for more weight, you're growing as your body or your muscles are growing. And something as simple, a very simple principle like that is just so transferable to pretty much anything in life.
Yep.
I think it's such a wonderful truth to be telling. But looking at what you were involved in law school or the jobs you were doing, you were first a judicial clerk for the Honorable Rosemary Grant Higgins, and
Hmm.
then you became a summer associate at Duncan Law Office. So can you speak about those experiences and as well on top of that, just to
Yeah.
add another
Yeah.
layer of questioning?
Yeah. So
Um,
go for it.
oh, of
So
course.
yeah, I mean, my clerkship was a was honestly a pretty cool experience. I clerked at Cook County Criminal Court, which is the busiest criminal courthouse in the country. And the judge I clerked for, she oversaw a specialty court that provided social services. It was called the Wings Court for recidivist prostitutes. Um, and I mean, she didn't have really any funding. It wasn't like statutory. She came up with this all on her own um, to link these women up with, job training, housing, parenting skills. I mean, whole host of kind of social services. So that was a really, for me, kind of a eye-opening experience of one part of being an attorney. And I knew I didn't want to do that. I absolutely knew I did not want to be a prosecutor. I did not want to be a public defender. I did not want to spend my time in the courtroom all day. It was in this dinky little, what they call a fishbowl courtroom. And I mean, I just got to see the justice system really close up. And I didn't want to be any part of that. So it was a great in the judge I cleared for, she was fantastic. It had nothing to do with her. I really learned a lot. She gave me a lot of opportunity to like write even some of her opinions. So it was a great experience. I think, a lot of people going to law school think I'm going to do X. Um, and then they get people get like disenfranchised or discouraged when really it's like it's better to figure that out now. Have a multitude of experiences, a multitude of exposures. I wish actually in law school I had done more um at kind of experiential type learning opportunities to see kind of what was out there. So that was one thing. The other then my uh soon to be future father-in-law was a bankruptcy attorney. Um, and I was specializing in bankruptcy in law school. Total coincidence. I never thought I'd be a bankruptcy attorney. Like I almost failed finance in college. Like, but I had an awesome professor, Professor Pam Foey. She is brilliant. And she approached that class wasn't like a lecture. It was like problem solving, and I loved it. And it was a small group. So that's what I wanted to do. A lot of people in the law, I mean, you'll interact with a lot of attorneys that are like, why are you going to law school? It's the worst decision you've ever made. You don't want to be an attorney. Like we are a brotherhood, sisterhood of misery. And my thing was like, it just clicked. Like bankruptcy was enjoyable. I understood it. It just makes sense to me. And so I just ran with it. My father-in-law was working on a big Chapter 11 case. And so I offered to help him. I wrote some briefs and came up with a really novel argument. Um, and we ended up, I don't want to say winning. There's not really winning in bankruptcy, being successful. So yeah, that was a great experience. And I didn't do on-campus interviews. OCIs. I didn't want to work at Big Law. Like I that just didn't jive for me. Like I knew some people that are a few years ahead of me because that was a benefit I had is some people I knew from undergrad went straight to law school and it just didn't seem like me, like working 70, 80 plus hours a week, sleeping at your office. Like some people are designed that way. I wasn't. And so after working for my father, soon to be father-in-law, um, I took a solo small practice class and loved it. I was like, wow, there's like some really cool attorneys that seem really happy and are having a lot of fun. And they're at like their own firm or a small firm. Like that's what I want to do. So I actually turned down a clerkship, clerking for a bankruptcy judge in Chicago, which is really prestigious. And I just was like, you know what? This isn't for me. I even went and met the judge and was like, this isn't it. Um, and that's kind of set me on the path the whole time is I always kind of go back to the questions like, is this me? And revisit that. And you can kind of mold yourself as you practice law and you can iterate and you can redefine yourself because you become it, like you said, each day you're a different person. Each year of practice, you're a different person. Your experiences, what you do outside of the practice of law, your dynamics of your life completely change. And so the needs that I have today, the needs my family have today, what I want to do has changed tremendously over the last decade. Um, so I just follow it.
Yeah.
I don't fight it, which is very counterculture to what a lot of attorneys do.
Yeah, well, please excuse my philosophical input here. I'm a
Yep.
philosophy major, so I can't help it a lot of the times.
Let's go.
Yeah. But Heraclitus, one of his very famous quotes is that the man who steps into a river and comes back to that same river, nor the man or the river are the same. And I think that runs in my head like every single
Mm.
day. And I think that's
It's very
perfect.
zen.
It's a
It's very
per
zen.
it's a perfect quote to what you were saying there, that you can
Yeah.
constantly redefine yourself. There's a lot
Yep.
of important points you made there. You talked about experiences. From my experience in doing this podcast and talking to attorneys, is that a lot of the times, just like yourself doing that clerkship, you figure out what you don't want to do, which is usually I wouldn't say more important than finding out what you want to do, but it's a key component in finding out what you want to do. And from what they've said and what you've said yourself is that getting that experience is so important because actually doing the work, because you may like it on the outside, like
Mm.
myself, and I was like, oh, I'd love to be like criminal prosecutor. But then I worked at my DA's office this past summer. I was fortunate enough, and I figured out I was like, yeah, no, I'd never want to. Like, it was a great experience, learned a lot, but I'd never want to be in a DA's office. It just wasn't for me. And also as well, you talked about playing to your strengths, the fact that you were more geared towards the smaller firms and not the big law, knowing yourself, being able to know yourself and put yourself in the positions where you can excel and be successful in a way that fits you. And also, saying no is such a superpower. It is such a
Oh,
superpower that I need to learn more because I
yeah.
say yes to pretty much everything nowadays. And you yourself, I mean, you turned down the big clerkship because you knew it wasn't for you. So you were at the Duncan Law Office, then you ended up as an attorney at law at Coing and Dunn. So how was that experience? What was that like?
Yeah, so I then joined my father-in-law's practice out of law school. Um, and he didn't know what he was saying yes to when he agreed to have me come join his practice. But over the next 2.5 years, I modernized his entire practice. It's one of the greatest strengths I have is in making things more efficient. The practice of law historically hates efficiencies. It's not, there's no incentive to be efficient, really. And so, but that's changing. That's changing. And in the practice area that he did and I do is a lot of it's flat fee. So you better be efficient. So I turned his practice into a lean, mean fighting machine. Um, and honestly, I was at an open house at Koenig Dunn chatting with one of their attorneys, and I was like, wouldn't it be awesome if I worked here? And she was like, actually, it would be. Are you interested in working here? And this is kind of how I do everything. I'm not afraid to ask. I'm not afraid to put out an idea before it's even fully formulated, before I even understand the ramifications. Some people can think that's kind of um, impulsive, but a lot of it has to do with I do a lot of time being introspective, self-reflective. And so when these decisions come and they pop, they're not really impulsive at all. They're just ready. Or maybe not even ready. They're ready to come out of my mouth or into the world so that it can kind of be molded. So yeah, I actually was interviewing for a job at Koenig Dunn. They were a family law firm. I didn't do family law really at all. And I pitched the idea of our entire practice, my father-in-law and me coming together. Um, and my father-in-law um, is a guy of tradition, same haircut, same mustache for at least 50 years, 40 years. And he said yes. The firm said yes. So um, it was a wonderful experience. And what I mean by that is, did everything go perfectly? Absolutely not. No. Did things not work? Yes, things did not work. You're taking two law firms and trying to squeeze them together from a culture, systems, process standpoint that had been around for decades. We didn't merge really as kind of get sucked into. And that's kind of where I found myself. We had uh, the founding partner, Susan Koenig, had stopped practicing at least a decade before I joined the firm to become an executive coach, which that was before that was cool. Right now, everyone's a coach. There's coaching everywhere, but back then that was still kind of novel. So we all got the benefit of that. So that was one benefit. The other was business development. Um, many attorneys have no idea how to do intentional business development. And I'm not talking about networking. I'm talking about business development. Like, how do you grow yourself as a thought leader? How do you grow your personal brand? How do you become comfortable making the ask without it seeming like you're a used car salesman? And I became just an absolute business development madman. Like, I was everywhere. Like, I got really involved in the bar. I was writing, presenting, lunches, coffees, events. Like, I met hundreds of attorneys in a 3.5 year period of time. Like, I was literally everywhere. So that was the greatest gift. This firm I was at was very forward thinking in that way. They were very intentional. They made sure there was time and support for doing this business development work, which a lot of firms don't commit to. Um, and then my father-in-law retired, right? And here I was, a bankruptcy attorney at a family law firm, and it just didn't make sense. Not personal. Um, and so I told them I was going to leave. So I did, um, because it was time for me to go. So nothing bad, nothing bad. A lot of attorneys break up because something bad happened, but this was really beneficial for everyone. So I went off on my own and did Patino Law Office. My first day was April 1st of 2020. And you can imagine how that went to start solo, right as the world was shutting down. So, so that's kind of that next piece. My first phase of my career, about the first 6 years, was done through the lens of first my father-in-law and then Koenig done, right? You lose part of yourself necessarily, or because traditionally that's how it is as an attorney, right? Like you need to kind of mold yourself to the environment you're in, the culture you're in, the expectations. Um, and so it's kind of like then I went off on my own and it's been wild since. And I've embraced that chaos and I've embraced that wildness and the adaptability and kind of coming into what it means to practice law. Um, Now, I mean, I don't wear suits, I don't wear a tie, I wear backwards hats and Patagonia and Birkenstock sandals and have a giant beard, and it's not a show. I'm not a clown. Um, like this is just who I am. And like I was like, what if for my law firm we take our headshots, I'm gonna wear a hoodie. So I did it. Nothing. The internet didn't break. I didn't get any bar complaints. Clients honestly love it. I've had people hire me because I'm not wearing a suit. Um, and so it's just kind of like leaning into that. And it's a process. Like you'll hear, going to law school kind of strips you of your identity. I didn't feel that really. I mean, I graduated and had long hair and a big beard. Like that, law school didn't do it. It was my first half of my years practicing that did. I was in a new environment. I wasn't from Nebraska. That's where I practice. And you have to, well, maybe you don't have to, but I did kind of play the game, right? And that got me a lot of success, you know, accolades, connections, respect. Um, but I got on lists of things, best of this, best whatever. Um, and I just now at this point in my career, like I could care less if I get on another like best of anything list. I don't care about kind of those traditional accolades. I don't care about the prestige. What I care about is like having a good time, being chill, and like being an everyday dude who's approachable and kind and takes care of myself and doesn't only care about work. You'll hear, I'm sure you've heard like client-centered law firms. Like I'm not a client-centered law firm. I'm a human-centered law firm because the client-centered takes out of the equation the attorney, the legal professionals. Like if we're sacrificing all of ourselves for the client, that's not what it means to be good client care. You can't sacrifice yourself completely because if you turn to dust, you're not a very good attorney as dust, or if you're 6 feet under the ground. So, yeah, I mean, it's been intense, right? Being an attorney is intense no matter what. Like, I have full autonomy, right, Nate? Like, I get to do what I want to do. I'm my own boss, and it's still intense. Shit, some days it might be even more intense. So yeah, that's kind of the journey from beginning kind of to going off on my own. And the last 4 years have just been nuts.
Yeah.
Um,
I love what you're saying, honestly, because I'm very much the same way in terms of I sometimes I like wearing a suit. I think I'd look good in it. But like I'm always wearing my UGG slippers. I wear my UGG slippers pretty much anywhere. I'm wearing sweatpants, sweatshirt. You know,
Yeah.
I'm just booling, as the kids would say
Yeah.
nowadays.
I don't even know what that means, but yes, whatever. As long as it's not derogatory, I agree with you.
It's
Um,
not, it just means you're doing well.
oh, that's good.
But but I think it's a wonderful thing to put out there in the world, the fact that you should play to who you are, not try to be someone else. 'Cause it's sort of the reality of what's going on and who you actually are, and trying to match that up is always very important to me, and clearly it was very important to you.
Yep.
And you know, I think what you're saying is that not everything is work, because everything absolutely is not just work.
Oh,
Uh,
it can't be. It
it
can't
can't be.
be.
It can't be just work. You have to have hobbies. I have a lot of hobbies. And I'm very serious about my hobbies. But I think something that you were saying before, talking about personal brand, is that the fact that you're taking the headshot in your sweatshirt is your personal brand. So can you
Hmm.
talk a little bit about personal brand, talk about what it is
Hmm.
and how you can employ that?
Ooh. So, that this is a hot topic right now is personal branding, right? And to me, it's taking inventory of what do you value? How do you naturally talk, present yourself? What feels good, right? Don't deny yourself that, you know, the way that I talk, you wouldn't know I'm an attorney. The way that I look, you wouldn't say I'm an attorney. And that's by design, right? I'm just a normal person that just so happens to be an attorney, right? That's just like one function of what I provide. And so, you know, particularly in the legal profession, if you go and look, right, look at billboards for attorneys. They're either ridiculous, um, have a lot of puns, or they all look the same. Go to attorney websites, okay? Gosh, so many of them look exactly the same. Go on LinkedIn and just search attorney and look at people's headshots, right? They look very, very similar. Um, at the end of the day, we're running a bit, we're in business. If you blend in, people aren't hiring attorneys because someone writes the best brief. Most clients, like 85% of legal services, are provided by solo small attorneys. Rarely is a consumer, right, an everyday person hiring an attorney because like that person won oral advocacy at law school, right? No, they're hiring you because you're relatable and you can solve a problem they have. And hopefully you can do it at a cost, at a price that they can afford and live with for the value you're providing. And so for me, personal branding is like, how are you? Who are you? And how do you present that? How do you unlock that to be a differentiator? Um, to show that, hey, in a sea of horses, I'm the unicorn. But attorneys traditionally, historically, don't want to be the unicorn, right? They want to be a horse. They want to say, I'm a horse just like every other horse. Well, that's really confusing for a consumer, right? Then they don't know. How are they then deciding to hire you? If there's 10 contract attorneys and they all look like horses, how do they know? How are they hiring you then? Based upon price, your hourly rate? What are they choosing? It's typically the reason why someone's hiring you is if they find you directly, they relate to you. They like you. You're likable. You can hold a conversation. You can answer their questions. You can be vulnerable if you don't know the answer. These are all things of personal branding. Um, the other is thought leadership. Okay. So, a lot of my work comes from other attorneys, a lot. And, I just had someone contact me and they're like, based upon what you're posting on LinkedIn, and I don't know this person well. Okay. Um, I never interacted with them before. Okay. But just based upon what I post on LinkedIn was like, you are creative and you're a bankruptcy attorney. Okay. We are looking for someone to consult on a case that's a creative bankruptcy attorney. Are you interested? Okay. So this has nothing to do with anything other than my personal branding, right? That I've held and I am a creative, and what I'm doing is creative. I'm not making this isn't like a scheme. This is just who I am, and take it or leave it. This isn't going to jive with everyone, right? Like some attorneys probably see what I'm doing and are like, I'm never referring anything to Patrick Patino ever again, and that's cool. Like, right? I What ends up happening is it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because I am this way, this is me. I get clients that appreciate this. I get other attorneys that are referring me work that appreciate what I'm doing. What ends up happening? I get better clients. Why? Because they have chosen me because of just me. I'm not having to put on an act. I'm not having to like try too hard. The sale, I guess at this point, I'm not even having to push that. And so really over the last, I would say 2 years that I've kind of really stepped into this personal branding and accepted it and just push it. Like, hey, I'm gonna get tattoos. I'm gonna wear backwards hats. Like, um, the client interaction is just so much better. Our clients are just better. We have had less clients that we've had to get rid of. We've had less distress over like poor client interaction. Um, and I attribute a lot of that, honestly, most of that to this personal branding. And, there can be a lot of fear around it. There can be a lot of fear of like, I'm losing out on work, which I'm sure I am, but I don't care. I'm actually making more money now than I was 2 years ago. So something's working. There's my diatribe. My bird walk about personal branding.
No, I think it was perfectly said, and what you're doing is you're being very authentic in what you're doing. That this is you're showing your authenticity to people. Like this is me. You could accept it or not. And those
Yep.
people who do accept it, it makes everything much more frictionless in terms
Yep.
of they know who you are, they know the kind of person you are, and if
Yep.
they're jiving with you, it's gonna be even better because you both enjoy the same things.
And
You
there's trust. And there's trust. So like a big part of practicing law is trust. People feel like they can open up to me. They feel like they can be themselves. They can be vulnerable. This is scary. I do bankruptcy law. This is like scary stuff. And if I can provide some amount of like comfort or it's like okay, it's like okay to not be okay, or it's okay to just show up how you show up that day in that moment. Um, it humanizes the whole thing. And that's just a missed part. This isn't transactional. Like at the end of the day, what I say is the law is the law. It's how people feel. Like outcomes are outcomes. Most of the time, particularly in the practice area that I'm in, clients aren't leaving reviews on Google being like, Patrick got me the best bankruptcy discharge ever. Right? Like that's not what they're saying. It's like, well, they did it with kindness. They're professional, right? And some people would see me, right? How I'm presenting, how I'm doing all that stuff is unprofessional. But I mean, I've actually had the opposite response. Um, and so to me, it's kind of what is the boundary of what it means to be professional, I think is just right now in real time being redefined.
I could not agree more, quite honestly. I think things are much more, especially just looking on LinkedIn. Um, People are much more open about what's going on. People are much more open about, especially like mental health
Mm,
concerns in the legal field. I see a
mm,
ton of people talking about that on LinkedIn and really redefining what it means to be in this profession. That it's not just suits and
mm.
briefcases, but rather people talking to people and relating to people. And it always goes back to something I always highlight on this podcast is that when you go through law school, I've never been, but from what I've heard from people and what people have told me, when you go through law school, you read a bunch of plain text, you're applying fact patterns to the law, and you're writing briefs and motions, but you forget that human aspect of it all.
Mm,
And I think in the past 6 months that I've really been on active on LinkedIn and reading more posts and consuming more content there, I've realized that a lot more people are leaning into the human aspect of things
mm,
and sort of bringing things
mm,
back to as much as this is a profession of suits and briefcases,
mm,
this is also a profession of human beings talking to each other and figuring out problems. I know specifically for bankruptcy, when I was younger, my parents ran into some bankruptcy problems, and their attorney was absolutely amazing. And he really was so down to earth in helping them and figuring out solutions for the money problems that we were having. So I'm forever grateful for that because I wouldn't be here doing this podcast without
yeah.
that man. Um, but I want to ask a question about
Yeah.
opening your own law firm because
Hmm.
I feel that in the past when I ask people this, it opens up a whole Pandora's box of the struggles and the trials and tribulations of it. So can you
Mm.
talk about opening your own firm?
So, um, the origin story of my own firm is that um, I designed and built the initial website while I had COVID, in like 104-degree fever. So it's like a fever dream. Um, and that's kind of how it can be sometimes. It's like a fever dream. Part dream, part overwhelming, part there's a lot of pressure. Um, and it's a both and, right? Attorneys a lot of times like creating these black and white dichotomies. It's either or, it's either great or not. It's either a win or a loss. Um, and I just have really tried to ascribe to things just are. And that can be easier said than done, right? And I have fallen prey to burnout way too many times. That's a self-judgment. But, starting your own firm, it's like in-house counsel. It's put out there as kind of this escape. Like, here you are, you're in this situation, in this environment. It's toxic, it's stressful, it's hard, it's a lot of work, it's demanding. Well, greener pastures are in-house counsel. Like, in-house counsel is going to be like Mecca. Starting your own firm is, oh, then you call the shots. It's going to be so much better. It's just different. Um, I work less, like in actual minutes and times in like a traditional sense. But you're never done working when you own your own business in general. You're thinking about it. Some of the best ideas come like you're just like putting your kid to bed and you have like the best idea. You're like, you know, making pottery at the pottery wheel and something pops into your head. And that has a cost, right? At the end of the day, can't just really step away. Like if I needed a month off, I couldn't do it. Now, maybe I'll get to that point. But yeah, starting a law firm today, in today's day and age, doesn't take much. That's the easy part. I mean, you don't need much to start a law firm. The internet, email, malpractice insurance, a domain name, in some way to manage your files and referrals, like in money. Like if I'm going to just make it really, really simple, but in terms of it, kind of this struggle narrative, Um, and it being, things being horrible, right? I mean, attorneys like talking about this. Like when you see two attorneys, it's like kind of that joke, like two attorneys walk into a bar. What's the first thing they're going to say to each other? Hi, how are you doing? I'm busy. How are you doing? I'm busy. You know, busy. It's a good problem to have, right? Bullshit. That is such crap. Um, and so, you know, I being having my own firm, and kind of being a creative, I've iterated, I've done things that have worked, like this personal branding stuff. I've done some things that don't work, like trying to expand into other practice areas. I've done some things like work. I run a virtual practice. I haven't met a client in person in 4 years, right? The downside of that is very isolating, right? So there's trade-offs, and you have to decide what it's worth to you. You'll see this. I mean, if we're talking about LinkedIn and echo chambers, the other one is, how to make millions of dollars, how to scale your law firm. What if that's not your goal? For a time, yeah, I was like, sure, I could scale, I could add all these people, I could add geographic locations. I am sure I could do it. God, it's a lot of work. Ton of work. I mean, to actually do that when no one talks about is the actual work that takes is you're always working. I mean, no one is going to come out and say it, but you are all like literally Monday through Sunday, you have to be working 10 to 12 hours a day. Um, so for me, I mean, if I'm being honest, just at like a crossroads, right? I've been doing all this stuff. I've been doing it a decade. Being full transparent, like some days do I love it? Yeah, absolutely. Is it some days super fun? Yes. Is it really rewarding, fulfilling? 100%. But sometimes the practicing law is very demanding. And there's a lot of rules and there's a lot of things to follow and there's, deadlines and there's court hearings that get put on your calendar during your kid's spring break that you can't move. And, you know, um, so it's a blessing and a curse. Hopefully more blessing than curse. And you have a lot more control and agency over what you do and how you do it than I think a lot of attorneys recognize. And if you don't like where you're at, change it. And if you can't change it where you're at, go someplace else. Go build something. Literally, like I said, it's at least you're betting on yourself if you go start your own thing, right? Is it stressful? Yes. But at the end of the day, you know, it's Friday. Will I work this afternoon? Answer, no. Do I have a Bill Bar requirement? Answer, no. And so, you know, I'm working on right now just like chilling out a little bit. Like what happens if you just like chill? Like just let things exist. Attorneys are so into productivity and achievement. And if not, you're like a lazy piece of shit. Literally, this is kind of how the thought process goes. But I'm like, maybe there's some magic to just like doing 10% less in the next quarter. Like, what will that give me? I don't know. No one ever talks about that stuff. Like, what if I have a goal of like scaling back? No one talks about that. Like, where's the mastermind group on like, I want to scale back 10%. Right? Maybe I'll start it. So,
Yeah, I mean this reminds me heavily of someone who I love dearly, a real idol of mine, but Tim Ferriss. He talks about the 80/20 principle,
yep.
but he talks about busyness is
Yes.
actually a form of laziness that when you're being busy per se, like just doing things to be doing things for the sake of doing things is not actually productive at all. and that rather finding out the things that actually make you more efficient, make you more effective, using that 80-20 principle, that 20% of the things actually give you 80% of the outcomes. So even
Well,
scaling backwards is something that would be
well,
something of that 80-20 principle.
and I've done it before. And I've done it before. I during the pandemic, I stopped working Fridays. You know what I learned? I didn't. Nothing happened. Honestly, I just worked a whole day less. Like I still got all the work done. I actually made more money. I was more productive. I was more efficient. Nothing happened. Like and so yeah, it's really this fascinating thing. It's in the conversation right now of like 32-hour work week. Yeah, we're gonna get there for sure. I mean, AI alone is going to eliminate 25% of the bullshit work that we do. I mean, just straight up. It's like we're going to be able to just be like, here are these bank statements and put it into a spreadsheet. In the next 5, 6 years, it's probably going to be able to do that. And you're going to say, like, give me a profit loss statement. It'll just do it. You won't need a human to do anything. You won't need, it will just be done. And it's going to be accurate because all we're talking about is math, right? Like, and so, yeah, it's a really right now we're at as a profession is kind of this. You mentioned kind of seeing on LinkedIn. That's unfortunately it's kind of another echo chamber. Um, how many attorneys at large are thinking and then also doing? There's a lot of people thinking and talking. There are plenty of people doing that you see on LinkedIn, but there's a lot of people that are just there in the shadows. They're attracted to doing something different, but don't take action. There's also a lot of attorneys who think there's nothing wrong with the way the profession is designed. If if you aren't willing to sacrifice and be on call 24/7 and do everything for the client and sacrifice yourself, you're in the wrong profession. The legal profession is not designed for those kinds of people who want a different way of living. The legal profession, it's a civic duty, right? You signed up for this. This is where we're at. Like this is miserable. It's horrible. Like, yeah, you're gonna work on vacation. Like, why are you complaining? That's what you signed up for. Like, there's a large segment of attorneys who honestly hold that belief, right? I mean, and so I'm not trying to be pessimistic, but I'm hopeful, but we're just not there yet. I don't think we're as close to all of this kind of being more open, more accepting, more kind, more human. Um, are we going to get there? Hopefully. I'm hopeful, but it's like it's going to take a lot of change. Law school is going to have to change. Like how people get jobs is going to have to change. Clerking is going to have to change. Like so many things are how we bill clients and make money is going to change. I mean, so it's easy to say like well-being, right? Or wellness, and we need to have these, and that's good, right? It's a starting point, but to effectuate this change is going to take a major systemic overhaul. And it's going to take some power brokers to get on board. But yeah, so that's kind of where I guess um, I'll end is just, it takes a lot of energy to change. It takes a lot of energy to shift a paradigm. I've been in it. You said, you're a person that likes, says yes and saying no is a superpower. I've been there, in my own journey doing the Newfangled Lawyer podcast and like sharing a narrative and stories of attorneys is so powerful. Um, it also takes a lot of work and I'm not complaining, right? And I'm not trying to say like, oh, woe is me. It's very fulfilling. But to be out there trying to kind of change the narrative. Um, Show up as yourself. Like I'm an introvert, which no one would believe, but it's like at the end of the day, then I'm like fulfilled but exhausted. So like after this conversation, I'm gonna go tell my wife like that was awesome, and I need a nap. Like,
Well, Patrick, I couldn't agree more with that. In terms of the podcast, in terms of changing the narrative, because the narrative is seemingly changing in the legal landscape, and as AI technologies, like you said, as different products come out. But this leads into my next question: is are there any AI technologies or new cutting edge technology that you're seeing or using yourself,
mm,
sort of like what your tech stack is looking like at the moment, and any recommendations that you have for people
it's
out
a it's a great so what are some people like tech evangelists? I'm a tech skeptic. I love technology when it's a tool. Um, when it can make my life easier. Um, Honestly, my paralegal and I have been talking about this. Although technology has advanced, I don't think it's made it really any easier. It hasn't, it hasn't. Now we're just managing all this tech stack. Our tech stack is massive. I mean, to do everything, we have at least 10 cloud-based software solutions that we're utilizing. 10 at least, if not more. So, yes, in terms of technology, we use a lot of technology. Um, we everything's virtual, everything can be provided electronically, signed electronically. I tell people that they can do the entire bankruptcy process from home. Do I use AI? No. Um, some people are early adopters. My practice area would benefit highly, 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 highly from AI to do everything from intake to reviewing documents. The issue that we have right now is there's a lot of personal sensitive information. I mean, figure
there?
I'm getting people's bank statements, tax returns, social security cards, photo IDs. AI is not secure enough yet. So I can't put that into a machine not knowing where it's going to go or be spit out, sprout somewhere else, like in the Ukraine or China, or not to be stereotype, but there's a real risk. So yeah, I'm I guess a vocal kind of skeptic of AI. I think by the time it actually matters, it's going to be integrated in so many things we won't even know. You're young enough. I mean, it's like cloud computing. Okay. This was the thing, right? Even when I started practicing a decade ago, people were still nervous about the cloud, right? My father-in-law had his own server. Okay. Right. Some attorneys are still nervous about the cloud, right? They have their own server. The cost of maintaining that has just got to be insane because there's less third-party IT to support that server. So, but I digress. By the time now, right, we're years removed, if you tried to maintain something on your own server, what? Right? Adobe, it's like is on the cloud. Microsoft's on the cloud. Google's on the cloud. I mean, literally anything you want to use is a cloud-based thing. It doesn't matter. Like you'd be like trying to really fight to keep things. So I think the same thing about AI. I think by the time it actually matters and is good is going to be 5 to 6 years from now, maybe 10 years. I mean, Google still doesn't have the ability to have a shared email folder in your team. So like people think we're so advanced. Google just updated the look and feel of their login page. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like it's we're not as far along as we think.
No, I agree with that honestly, but I've known like ChatGPT I use for school a lot. Don't tell my professors. Um, but I use it a lot for school. It helps me out
Yeah,
there.
it's cool. It's cool.
Um,
It's cool, and that's where it stops. I
I
mean, I think for me, it's cool, but like honestly, I can crank out a one-page letter faster than ChatGPT would do it, and then I got to revise it. Like honestly, like some of the stuff is, and maybe I'm just being averse, because I love change. I like new things, but yeah, maybe that's a surprising answer to you from someone like me. I don't know.
No, no, I think it's an interesting perspective to have. I've
Yeah,
just my perspective is very different because
yeah,
I've known about AI for like a while. I knew about ChatGPT in like my senior year of high school. So my freshman year I was using it and playing around with it. I was like, wow, this is like it's cool, it's fascinating.
yeah,
But does it have utility? I don't think we know that
exactly,
yet. I don't think we know that
exactly.
yet. But as time
Yeah,
goes on, as they advance it, we'll know. But switching
yep,
gears a little bit.
yep.
Um, we're down to our final four questions. The first one is, what are your official Patrick Patino live on the Lawyers in the Making podcast? What are some book recommendations that you have, people? It doesn't have to be about the law, but just some of your favorite books you've ever
Oh,
read.
dude,
You would give a gift to someone, maybe say.
you struck a chord. Um, so since giving up my iPhone 2 years ago, I've been like a reading madman. Um, I just read recently Unreasonable Hospitality. That's a must read. Everyone should read that. It's a phenomenal book. Um, in terms of just reading in general, I really like any kind of mindfulness meditation book by Thich Nhat Hanh. Um, you know, it's I started Monday mornings blocking out just an ease into the week just so I can be present. And that's been really helpful for me. Trying to think what else I've read recently. Some people would say Atomic Habits, um, but I'm not going to suggest that book. It's an okay book. Um, James Clear is kind of it. I mean, it's a. I got made my way like halfway through it. Um, that's kind of like the kind of sexy pick. I'm trying to think. What's another book I read recently that kind of blew my mind? Shoot, why can't I think of it? Um, it will come to me. I like reading any book about like restaurants. So like I go to like the James Beard Award. You can get a James Beard Award for writing a book about food. So any of those. I've read a bunch of those because I love food and I think there's a lot of parallels between the restaurant industry and the legal industry. They're very similar in a lot of ways. That's a great question. I like that question. Um, I should I and it's better I'm shooting from the hip here. There's so many. There's so many. I should keep actually now that you mentioned, I should keep like a list of my favorite books just in preparation for this question. But next question. Hit me.
Yeah, I don't have a list myself. I just have a crate
Yeah.
of books as of right now. But
Yeah.
if I
Uh-huh.
were to make one recommendation, because I need to do this, but it's by Seneca. It's Letters to Lucilius. It is unbelievable, and it's from like 500 AD. But it is a fantastic book in terms of like mindfulness, like you said, like
Yeah.
that stuff. Ew, I'm like, when I read it the first time, I was like, is this guy talking to me? Is it like, does he know?
Yeah.
Like
Those are
this
the
guy.
best books. Those are the best books. One of the ancients, one of the classics.
I'm
It's
a
good to
big
know.
classics guy. I pretty much only read old books. But next question. So, what are the sorts of things that you consume, not food, consume on a daily basis, either that be through social media, so LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram,
Ooh.
YouTube,
Mm,
Reddit, Substack, any people that you follow that you really like, you're always looking at all the time. What's
mm,
crossing the transom of Patrick's mind on a daily
mm.
basis?
It's a fantastic question. So the only social media I have is LinkedIn. I don't read the news. Um, I don't have Twitter. I don't have a smartphone. I basically, when I'm not working, I completely disconnect. I'm going to be pushing that a step further. Starting May 1st, I'm going to have an office and I'm going to keep all of my technology at the office. And when I physically leave there, I'll have no access to anything, no email, no anything. All I will have is I carry a dumb phone. It's called a light phone. It just calls and texts. And so, in terms of like consuming, I don't really partake in the consumer, like consume things like watching YouTube videos or TikTok or any Reddit or anything like that. I read a ton. I mean, I am like a library power user. I'm reading probably at any given point in time between like 5 to 7 books. And honestly, I'm just consuming my own life. Like I just sometimes just like go sit on my back deck and look up at the stars. Like that's what I'm consuming. Or sometimes I just sit and like watch the clouds go by. Um, on LinkedIn, I mean, who are like some good follows on LinkedIn? Um, Molly Huff, she's awesome. She's a real dynamo. Um, Tony Albrecht, he's the man.
Oh, the man.
Um,
He is the man.
yeah, I mean, I just had on my podcast Pat Vea. He's a Canadian, French Canadian attorney who now lives in Costa Rica. He's super cool. Um, I've had such a wonderful privilege now of starting the podcast of and putting myself out there, right? And just asking, getting in the room. Like I just started, right? Asking people like, hey, well, much like you, hey, do you want to talk? And most people are like, yeah. Heidi Brown, she's a big inspiration of mine. Has written a lot of books about attorneying, being introverted, attorneys as like performance athletes. She's super cool. So that's really, I mean, I do LinkedIn, I work, I hang out with my family, I'm out in nature, and I'm just like an observer of my own life. I don't really give a shit about what, a viral video on YouTube. I don't care.
It's a beautiful attitude to have. I have to say,
I
you're
try.
you're you're in your own world and you're doing amazing. And this segues beautifully into my next question. Speak about nature and adventures. But
Yep.
what does an ideal Friday night and Sunday morning look for Patrick?
Ooh, probably an ideal Friday night would be like going to a food hall and eating like some real good pizza and tacos and having a good conversation. Um, I just did this recently. So I hosted a tattoo event. Tyler O'Brien, who's the long hair lawyer, he flew in from California and he and Ryan McLaughlin and I like hung out. We went and had an awesome meal. Um, and then the next day we got tattoos after we went for a walk in the morning. Um, an ideal like morning, Sunday morning is honestly like hitting up a coffee shop with my kids and my wife, getting some donuts, and then like going for a walk around like a lake or in the woods. Um, just something simple, man. Um, and connection and good conversation. I hate small talk. I like big talk. So,
Yeah, I mean it always got to keep it simple. No need to overcomplicate things, as I always do. I walk in the same park every single day, but every time I walk through it, it's better than the last time. There's
see
one
something different.
statue. I always go to the same statue though, and I look at it. And I'm like, ooh, that's a good looking statue. I'd like to look
Yeah.
like that. But last question here, Patrick. I do this at the end of every single episode, but what are your words of wisdom for the aspiring law students, the current law students, and the current legal professionals out there?
Ooh, my words of wisdom is you do you. Choose your own adventure. There's no prescribed roadmap. How anyone has done it before doesn't need to be the way that you do it. And that's okay. Um, you can even find success, find fulfillment, and it might not last forever. That's okay too. Life is long and dynamic. If you're feeling stuck, or you feel as though the thing that you dreamt of doing, um, and then you show up there isn't what you thought it would be, sit back, reflect. You don't have to make an immediate decision. Um, but you got to be clear, and intentional on who you are and what you want out of this life. Um, and that might seem very abstract, but there's a lot of practical considerations there. So you do you is the best wisdom I have. It will serve you in every facet of your life.
That's poetically said, and it is the message of this podcast that there is no straight path, that there is only your unique path. But Patrick, that's all we got today. That's the pod. So thank you so much for coming on here, sharing your wisdom, sharing your experiences. And for everyone out there listening, check us out, Lawyers in the Making, that's substack.com. Lawyers in the Making, one word, substack.com. And I will see you in the next one.